Have you ever wondered how to texture your node models inside of Cinema 4D? Well, it's actually easier than you may think. Today we're going to go over how to add multiple materials to one node model, how to rotate those materials to get them going the correct direction on your model, and how to store selections so that if you want to switch out materials later on, it's really easy. Nodes are something that even a beginner can learn. I truly believe in that. And you don't need to be a genius or an expert or really experienced to be able to do this. You just need a coach that will teach you how to hold a pair of chopsticks before handing you a large plate of food and saying, dig in. That's going to be really difficult to eat if you don't know how to first hold a pair of chopsticks. So here we break down everything, one node at a time. So let's get these nodes untangled. If you stick until the end, there's a surprise node we're going over too. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. This is our example model of what we are in fact working on today. It's this countertop. And over greater reflection, I'm going to set up the store selection a little bit differently for this one. You can see that I first split it and then I stored the selection. But I think instead we're going to rely more on the selection string here. There's really multiple ways to work with nodes, and none of them are necessarily wrong or right. It's just whatever feels natural to you and you enjoy doing. But I'm going to try it this way today. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing here. This is where we left off in the project. You can see that we're working on these sections separately, and we've already covered all of these nodes if you've been following along with this course. So as a brief start off, if you are not already, make sure that you are in your nodes layout. Make sure you have your asset browser open. And also in your options, it helps to turn on polygon indexes, especially for what we're doing here today. Now, in our asset browser, you can either search for this under the nodes folder or click the nodes up here. Now, if we go down in our geo selection, you'll see all of our selection nodes available. We've covered some of these already. Today, we're going to be talking about the store selection. So when you're 3D modeling a regular model, for example, this cube here, so that you can relate this to maybe other things inside of Cinema 4D. If we have this cube and we make it editable by hitting this button here, or you can hit the C hotkey, we'll be able to select a polygon here. And if we want to store a selection, we can go into our select, store selection, and we'll get this tag up here. And then we can use this in order to add a material. So I'll just add a material to this and make it a color. Let's make it blue. And we'll go ahead. We have this blue material in here. I can drag this over to the cube and I can drag and drop our selection into this selection here. And you can see that's one way of just texturing a part of this cube. Well, what if we want to be able to control this also for our base? And I'll show you an example of why this would be really useful for our base. Because you could say, hey, Leah, we're going to make this base all wooden. Why does it matter if we want to select individual polygons to texture them separately if the whole base is going to be one material? Well, I'll show you the problem that we run into. And it may be a problem that you run into on your personal projects or work projects. I'm going to go ahead and delete this material and delete its tag, because that was just an example. Now we're going to go back into our nodes mesh and use this in a real world situation where we're 3D modeling something and texturing it maybe for a client. So what I actually find really helpful is to use some of the textures that already come with Maxon 1. So let's switch from nodes to materials instead. And I'm going to search for wood. And you'll see that all of these little wood textures come up. And the ones with the redshift symbol next to it are the updated redshift materials. So if you have redshift, you can use these. If you don't have redshift, you can use some of the other ones here. Or you could go on Ambient CG and they have textures you can download for other types of renderers. So I'm looking at this and I'm going to download this because that sounds really pretty. Yes, this is chestnut. It's still pretty. I'm going to go ahead and use this chestnut texture here. I'll add it to my nodes mesh. And if I zoom in here and close the asset browser so you can see this a little bit more clearly, you may begin to be able to see what's the problem here with using one material going one direction for this whole model. Because in woodworking, woodworkers think about the wood grain and it's strongest running the length of, if the wood grain runs the length of the piece of wood. So if we're looking at this, a woodworker would never make anything like this. The wood grain should be going the opposite direction for some of these sections, but it's going the right way for this part up here. So we'll need to make these as separate selections so that we can go ahead and click on our material tag and make adjustments in here and also rotate our texture, and I'll show you how to do that. So we need to click on this so that we switch out of our material here and back into our nodes mesh. I'm going to go into my nodes, geo selection, and we're going to drag and drop our store selection in here. And I'll close that out. Now we're going to need a few store selections. So I want this one up here for the wood grain running one direction. And then I want to hold Control and duplicate it for another store selection. So let's go ahead and connect this to here. And connect this up here and just work on this section for right now. You'll be able to see all of them if you switch over into your model mode. So if you aren't seeing all of them, you may still be in the polygon mode. Make sure you're in model mode over here. And then we can see the numbers for our polygons and begin entering these into our store selection. So I can see that I want 5, 21, 0, 23, 7, all to be running vertically. And everything else can stay horizontal on that side. Now I can go ahead and do the same thing for this side. So now I can go ahead and add my material again here. And this one's going to be rotated again. And we want it to use this store selection. So let's go ahead and name this selection here. So I'm going to name this Wood Grain Runs Vertical. And now you can see that this appears. So let's talk briefly about what these settings are as we're using them. Your type is you can choose to store polygons, edges, or points. Your name is what you're going to name your store selection so that Cinema 4D can determine what your using as a selection if you have multiple. And then you have your selection string, and that's where you can add in what you actually want to add to your store selection. So here you'll see that we have Woodgrain runs vertical, and I grabbed that name that I entered within the node. So now I can click on this material that I just added, drag and drop our selection that we just made with our store selection into here, and now we have the texture added. But we haven't actually changed this at all so that it's running a different direction. So let's take a look at this. Instead of UVW mapping, let's switch it over to cubic. And that'll work very well because you can see this is very much so shaped like a cube. Now if you feel like the texture's looking a little large on here, it definitely is. So we can adjust that in the length U and the length V. So I can make it a lot smaller by just taking that down from 100% to 50%, like that. And now if we want to rotate it around, what we do there is we actually switch from model mode to texture mode. Now this lets you actually rotate the entire texture, scale it, move it, just as you would anything else. Now the hotkey for moving is E, so I can move this up. The hotkey for rotation is R, so I can rotate this. If I hold Shift, I will snap to degrees and increments of 5. So it looked like I was snapping to increments of 5 when I was using the R hotkey and holding Shift. So where that comes from is if you click on your settings up here, this little gear icon is your quantize. We'll click on that. I have a whole other YouTube video on the quantize, so I'll leave a link to that. And here you'll see we are rotating 5 degrees, so you can adjust that in there. If you hold Shift, it automatically enables it. You can also just have it on all the time by checking that box. Okay, so there we go. You can see now if we rotate around, it changed the direction for that side. Okay, looks like I needed to rotate that one more time. It might be a little dark in here, so it's hard for you to see it in the viewport. I'll turn this on. I just added a redshift sun and sky so you can see that a little bit better. But now you can see that we have the wood grain running all the same direction, which is much better. And I think I'm just going to shift this over a little bit so that these two sides look a little bit different. And that's looking pretty good to me. I'm actually going to give you a bonus where you learn an additional node because I think you'll find it's really helpful. So this is a bonus. You'll see that we have this option here called invert selection. So if you don't want to have to go all the way back in here and select all the other vertices, so what we'll do is we will, for right now, connect our store selection to our invert selection. And then we need to make another store selection, so I'm holding Control and copying that. I'm deleting those other extra nodes we have in here. And here, I'll connect the invert selection to the store selection. We'll give this a new name. And we'll also change this to, say, default. Now, default will just refer to the selection before. So now we're using the invert selection in order to control our selection string, this node, rather than entering in these manually. Now we want the wood grain to now run horizontal. So I'm going to rename this horizontal. And now that we have that, if we were to connect this up here, you'll see that we actually get Woodgrain runs vertical and Woodgrain runs horizontal. So now we can texture both of these. And I want this one to control I want this one to be controlled by this Woodgrain runs horizontal. So I need to find that one in here. So that's really nice because I've realized that in Redshift, sometimes if you have materials overlapping, you can run into some render errors that I've seen with Redshift. So I like to create store selections, even though we have this hierarchy in here, and the material further up in the hierarchy should override the one before the newest material we add to this. I've still seen render errors with that. So I think it's a good practice to just keep everything separate and have your texture only on the polygons that are needed instead of relying on that hierarchy all the time. So I like to do that. And let me know if anyone else has ever run into that error while rendering in Redshift. So right now our base is looking amazing. So let's talk about what we'd like to do for this top part here. So let's connect the extrude to the geometry here and our store selection to the geometry up here. So this is our countertop. It doesn't have any materials at this moment. But we can go ahead and decide we want our selection string to be every polygon in here, right? And then we can choose to give this a name. Let's name this Granite and try to find a granite texture. We want it to be polygons because we're working in polygons here. And now that we have this store selection, it's connected in here. And we can see that we have it actually here. So this is our granite. Let's go into our search in here. We're under nodes. We'll want to be in our materials, and let's look for some granite. And you can see by hovering which ones are Redshift and which ones are not Redshift. So we have all of these pretty materials. And I'm thinking that this lighter color will be a really nice contrast against the chestnut. So let's go ahead and double click on this to download it. Use whatever materials you'd like. Get creative. You can even build your own, which is super fun. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop this onto here. Now what do we want our selection to be? We want it to be our granite. So you can see in here just how close we are to finishing up this project. What we have next is to cover the connect node. And then I'd like to also cover the cloner. And then you'll be fluent with all of these different tools, all of these different nodes inside of here. So if you're interested in learning that connect node and wrapping up this project or getting real close to it, click this link up here, and I hope to see you there.